So the, the question isn't really, I think, is there or is there not a rigorous syntax for LaTeX? Or can we create a parser for LaTeX? But rather, let LaTeX as a PDF generator be whatever it is. Do we or do we not wish to impose restrictions on the LaTeX documents we produce and provide to others? Or if not restrictions, are there certain pieces of information we'd like to have, metadata, if you like, regarding the LaTeX documents we produce? And I think that for beginners like to have rules about what can and can't be done. Even if the rules are wrong, they want to have rules. I think that's right. And I think for situations of automated generation, automated typesetting systems, one wants a high degree of confidence that any document that passes your checks will typeset properly. So that's one range of areas. Now, for amusing people, for entertaining people, and for demonstrating one's own skills, one might break the rules. You have people that do tricks in snooker and that sort of thing. And there may be circumstances where you have to introduce something that's not allowed in the rules. But for many applications, one wants to have documents that conform to some sort of behavior. Now, there's a second thing which is related to this, which is one of the most successful applications of HTML, LaTeX to HTML, for the production of both PDF and HTML from the same source, is the Python documentation up to about Python 2.4, 2.5. They use LaTeX to HTML. They customized it a bit, and that way they got PDF output and they got HTML output. Now, their definition in practice of valid LaTeX was it typeset and it generated PDF and it generated HTML. It's valid if it generates both the outputs you want and nothing bad has happened. That's roughly the definition they had. And I think for many applications, that would be really useful. Certainly journal publishers want to be able to convert whatever they've got to HTML, and conversion to HTML is a really big factor, and it's also important for accessibility. So my approach to this is not to say LaTeX doesn't have a definite syntax. I'd rather say LaTeX syntax doesn't have a definite meaning. LaTeX syntax doesn't have a definite meaning. And anybody that sets up and uses and configures a LaTeX checker is saying the syntax they want their LaTeX to have. It's well known that human language doesn't, so to speak, have a negative syntax. And there's an old joke of a philosophy lecturer who said there are many examples of a double negative meaning a positive, but there are no examples of a double positive meaning a negative. And somebody in the back of the class said, yeah. So let's take LaTeX as it is. That's the view I take. Let LaTeX as a typesetting system be as it is. And those people that wish to say, this is what LaTeX syntax is, will write tools to create their own LaTeX syntax. And that's, roughly speaking, what happened with HTML5, was that the people that implemented browsers implemented rules for what happened when errors took place in the input. One of the large parts of HTML5 is ensuring that all the browsers had exactly the same rules for erroneous input, which is quite unusual. Usually in computing, when there's an error in erroneous input, you stop. But you can't do that with a web browser. In HTML5, produce consistency of layout, and CSS works the same on all browsers that conform to the standards, and people sort of competed to make sure that they succeeded with the tests. So that's my view. In a nutshell, it's LaTeX. The LaTeX of syntax, the syntax of LaTeX is undefined or not clearly defined, and any individual or group of individuals can define it to be whatever they want to be in a way that's useful for them. I'll stop.
A comment on the denial of service problem. This has to do with common implementations of regular expression parsers. But Russ Cox, who was working with the Plan 9 project at Bell Labs, was able to implement provably linear regular expression parsers that avoid this problem. But certainly Perl and Python have issues with it being possible to concoct inputs that make them take exponential time to complete. Now, of course, any language that has loops can also take not exponential time necessarily, but a long time. And so PostScript and TeX with its repeat construct can be made to do something a fairly large number of times. It will take a noticeably long time to complete. On the subject of SGML, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it was defined by this big fat book from Oxford University Press in 1994. Here is a picture of the author, Charles Goldfarb. And this book is complete with a blue ribbon, and it looks, very much like a legal document with numbered paragraphs and cross-references, and it's all very, very complex to read. Goldfarb went on to write an even bigger book. The SGML book is about 600 pages. His XML book is quite fat. It's about 1,200 pages, and it also is an extremely complicated book. It does have paragraphs that one can read that are more or less reasonable text, but it's still, when you're faced with 1,000 pages of documentation for what you would think would be a straightforward markup system, this indicates that we do have a problem. It's perhaps ought not to be this complicated. Perhaps it has to be when one looks at how broad the applications of markup are, but it's daunting for a user. Another issue is that when you look at grammars for programming languages that are expressed in Backus-Naur or Backus-normal form, BNF notation, they're generally relatively easy to understand. You can see that an if statement looks like an if followed by an expression followed by a then part and an else part. But with SGML and XML and HTML grammars, they're almost impossible for a human to unravel without hours and hours of study. Just to answer a simple question, can you have, for example, a URL mentioned inside a paragraph or inside a section heading? I've been through this myself because when I wrote the HTML pretty printer, I wanted to support all of the common grammar levels that were defined for HTML, even if they weren't widely used. And it's frankly a mess, and I don't think it has to be this complicated, but the reality is we're stuck with it because it's in wide use, and there's highly unlikely in our lifetimes to be any replacement candidate for HTML and XML.